Hi everyone, I'm Mrs. Blessley. I'm your photography teacher. Welcome to my house. This is my funky cool chair where I like to sit. Got an ice pack on my leg, and hopefully I'll be with you soon. But I want to talk to you a little bit about some history of how cameras came about, and make sure that you understand what all the knobs and buttons and everything are on your camera and how it operates so you can get some good pictures with your first roll of film. Open up your book to page 13. Looks like this. And you take a few notes when we go along. Okay, look at this top picture here. This is what's called a camera obscura. And a camera obscura is basically just a dark chamber that has a pinhole in one of the walls. And what happens is that the light comes through and it crosses over as it goes through the hole, and the image of what's outside of the camera obscura appears upside down and backwards on the surface that's in the back. This has been used way back until before the time of Christ. In 470 BC they were using it, and Leonardo da Vinci used it a lot in the 1400s and 1500s. Here's what he said about it. He said, if the facade of a building or a place or a landscape is illuminated by the sun, and a small hole is drilled in the wall of a room in a building facing this, which is not directly lighted by the sun, then all objects illuminated by the sun will send their images through this aperture and will appear upside down on the wall facing the hole. Now you know an aperture is just a word for an opening, right? So he's talking about the hole there. You'll catch these pictures on a piece of white paper which placed vertically in the room not far from that opening, and you will see all the above mentioned objects on this paper in their natural shapes or colors, but they will appear smaller and upside down on account of crossing of the rays at that aperture. If these pictures originate from a place which is illuminated by the sun, they will appear colored on the paper exactly as they are. The paper should be very thin and must be viewed from the back. So artists and even people from carnivals and fairs thought that this was a really, really cool thing. So in the 1800s, they put these camera obscura boxes on wheels and on carts, and they would take them and they were as a novelty, and people could go into them and be amazed by this thing. The largest one in the world is a big room, and it's in Wales, and it still exists. And then later on, right in about the 1800s, artists started using the camera obscura, and some of them put a lens. See there, right here's a lens, and to focus the light more, and then they could trace what they saw outside and get all of the perspective and everything in exactly the right place for making their drawings and their paintings. So it's a tool that's been used for a long time. Now we have a single lens reflex camera, which people think is ancient now because not that many people use film cameras, but we do, and we're lucky that we do. And here's one right here. And so it says how the single lens reflex camera directs the light to the viewfinder and the film to produce, what do you think that should be? Images the light creates. Because actually photography means writing with light. So if we look at this camera right here, and I'm going to take the lens off. This is one of my cameras, and I'm just going to remove the lens. I don't want you removing the lens on your cameras, but if you look inside here, you can see perhaps the mirror. Do you see a mirror? Can you see that? And when we fire the shutter in the camera, the mirror lifts up, and maybe perhaps you will see it move if I have a battery. There we go. So that lifts up out of the way. In our picture, we don't have the mirror, but we're going to draw it. So just take your pencil and draw the mirror because it's on an angle like that. So when the light comes in the lens, and you see there's several lenses in there, it's going to hit this mirror, and it's going to bounce up into here, and it's going to bounce here, and it's going to come out here, and this is where your eye is. So let's draw your eyeball. So that's how you are seeing exactly what this lens is called. And that's why it's called a single lens reflex, because we have one lens unit. It has lots of different lens glass in it, but it's considered one lens. So the light comes in, it hits the mirror, hits a mirror up here, and this area is called the pentaprism because it has 5 sides. It hits this mirror and it comes out the viewfinder to your eye, so you can see exactly what this camera is seeing through the lens. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so then you have pages 14 and 15. This is a picture of the Pentax K1000 camera. This is one of them. This is my favorite camera in the world. It's the first camera I learned to really take photographs with. We have a lot of them, but we have other Nikon, Canon, other brands as well. This is another Pentax camera of mine. It's a little bit fancier than the K1000, but this is kind of a standard for photography classes all over the place. So let's take a look at it. And then we're going to label these pictures. So this is your lens unit. It has a lens cap. You want to always keep your lens cap handy because this is what turns your light meter on and off. And the light meter reads the light, how strong the light is and whether or not you're going to get a good picture. So you have to keep this lens cap on unless you're actually taking a picture. Otherwise you're going to drain the battery and that'll cost you about $4 to replace. So here we have the lens. And then we have this button, which I don't want to use on this camera because there's film in it, but I can use it on this one right here. And this, if you pull it up, will release the back of the camera and open it so that you can load film. Now, it's important to know that you need to never touch the shutter here and never touch this part right here. You want to just put your film in and you're going to pull it across and load it here. And I'll show you how to do that. But never touch the shutter or this part that holds the film in there. But the way to open the back so you can get film in is to pull up this knob. So it's a release knob. And it also is the film rewind knob. You know, your film is only so long. For 12 pictures, it's probably about this big. And it's not forever like your camera in your phone. So you have a limit, and you'll get to the end, and it'll stop winding, and you'll have to rewind your film. Now this thing up here, right here, is where you would attach a flash attachment. See, it's got an X on it. And this has got an interesting name. It's called a hot shoe. And the reason why it's called a hot shoe is because this part right here delivers a little electrical spark when you fire the shutter that would tell the flash to go ahead and fire. This part right here is your shutter speeds. So that right here. This one right here is the shutter release. And that's what you push in order to get it to take a picture. This right here is a film counter. So it tells you how many pictures you took. Now some of them on our cameras don't work, but you're going to keep a log of your pictures that you take anyway so that you will know how many you've taken. This right here is the film advance lever. So it's, and I think I can see it better up here. So here we have the film advance. Because this camera is not going to do anything for you. You're going to have to do everything. You're the photographer, you're doing the thinking. So here we have the hot shoe. Here we have shutter speeds. And that tells me how fast the camera is letting light come in. This is, what is this one called? It's the shutter release. And here's your film counter. This is your rewind knob. and the lens. Okay, so that's looking at the camera from here. Lens, rewind knob with the little lever that we pull up, hot shoe, shutter speeds. This says ASA, that tells us what our film speed is, and it should be set already. You don't need to mess with that. Here's your your shutter release button and your counter and your film advance knob. On the back of the camera, this is called the viewfinder. That's where you look, and you have to put that up against your eye and take a look through it. Turn the page. On the bottom of the camera, turn mine the same as this, you have a little battery compartment. This camera takes a number 76 button battery. If your camera's light meter fails on you, then probably your battery has died and you can replace them. You can get them at Fred Meyer's. This right here is a threaded hole right here, and this is a tripod mount. So a tripod is a little stand with 3 legs that you can hold your camera on and keep it nice and steady. And this one is a really important, right here. This is a very important button, and it is the rewind button. You need to use that in order to rewind your film. So, and then this is the lens. We're going to take a look at what happens on the lens here. And it's already labeled for you. This is the distance scale out here. It tells you your area of focus. So say I'm taking a picture on this camera, and I'm going to line the 8 up. This is f-stops. It's openings in my lens, the size of the aperture or the hole. This is my distance scale, and it tells me in feet, in blue on this particular camera, how far I've got an area that's in focus. So let's talk about that for a second. If we look at this right here, f2.8, here's our camera. That's kind of a little icon to me in a camera. That means that I've turned this aperture so that f2.8 lines up with the diamond. Can you see that right there? Okay, so that means that I've got a great big opening in my lens. And it also means that I'm going to have a very, very shallow depth of field. What a depth of field is the area that's in acceptable focus from front to back, away from the camera. So here I've got 3 people, and if I've got f2.8, I've really only got a foot or so, maybe, that's in focus. And so from the person in front is out of focus, the person behind this person is out of focus, but this person is in focus. If I look at it here, f4, this is the next, it's 2 clicks up. f4, you can see that these are the leaves of the shutter, of the aperture, and it has this much area that's in focus. This in front of it is out, and this behind the person is out of focus, but from here to here, we've got an acceptable depth of field and a range of focus. If I turn my lens to 5.6, you can see that the opening in the lens, the aperture here, is getting smaller. Well, what that does is makes the area that's in focus bigger. So now I've got a larger depth of field here. This area is out, and this area is out of focus. If I go to f11, and I'm making the 11 match up to the diamond, then look how much more area in front and behind the person is in focus. And here it's out, and here it's out of focus. And then we get to these big numbers, 16 and 22. So if we go to 16, that's an expansive depth of field. That means everything's going to be in focus between all these 3 people. If we go to f22, that is infinity. Do you know that? It's like an 8 on its side. Infinity. in focus. So that means everything you can see will be in focus. If you were outside and you were looking at Mount St. Helens, the ground right in front of you, all the way to Mount St. Helens, will be in focus if your camera is on f/22. So you have to decide, do you want just a little bit in focus? Do you want a medium amount in focus? Now most point and shoot cameras, like the paper cameras that you might see at a wedding, will be set on f/8, and that's a pretty safe one to start with. And that will give you a nice area with some out of focus in the background. But if you want everything in focus, you want to go to f/22. Now what happens when you do that is that it changes how much light comes into the camera. Every time you change an f-stop, you're going to either double the amount of light that comes in. If you're going to a smaller number, it lets in twice as much light for every number, or you're going to cut it in half. So if I go from 5.6 to 8, I cut the light in half. And it's confusing at first, but the more you use your camera, the better you'll understand it. But at least we have a nice labeling of your camera, and you should know what all the parts are and what they do. Then let's turn over to the next page and we'll look at the openings inside the lens. Here's f2. That lens doesn't shut at all. It's completely wide open. It has the least amount of depth of field. Then f2.8. We cut down the amount of light that's coming in. You get more depth of field. f4, f5.6. Look how tiny the hole is getting. f16, and you get down to 22, and it's like a pinhole. It's a tiny little hole. So this is depth of field, how you can control what's in focus. Now, there's a little reminder. This camera's not going to focus for you. You have to do it. This ring out here, can you see this? This ring out here is your focus. And so you have to look through the viewfinder and look and see if your subject is in focus. And if not, you're going to have to focus it. You're going to hold your camera like this, underneath with your left hand, on top with your right. Use your right finger for the shutter and advance your film with your thumb. Focus with these two fingers. And if I look at this, say I'm on f8, and I look at this scale, I can see the 8 is at just before 3 feet and 3.5 feet. So f8, I really only have a 1.5 feet or so in focus. The other thing that we have is shutter speeds. Now the rule for shutter speeds is you cannot handhold anything smaller number than 60. So X is like stop. X is also the same X as here on the hot shoe. And that means that if you put a flash attachment on your camera, you got to set it at shutter speed 60th of a second, so that your flash and your lens work together. So you want to take pictures between 60, 125, 250, maybe 500 if it's a really bright day. 1,000 is like for snow scenes and for the beach, which we don't get too much of that in the winter. So you're going to stay between 60, 125, 250 probably, maybe 500. And these do the same thing that the apertures do. Every time you change the number, if I change it to 125, now I cut the light in half. If I change it to 50, I cut it in half again. 500 and 1,000. And I'll get the other camera to show you how quickly this goes. And I double it when I go this way. If you go down to 30, 15, 8, 2, 4, 1, then you're going to get camera shake and your pictures will all be blurry. So past the 60, you're going to need a tripod. And the B stands for bulb, and that's for night photography when you want to keep the lens wide open for a long time. So 60 or bigger. And If you want to do something that's in motion, you need to be probably about 250. So if somebody's moving at all, if you don't want any blurring, you need to be around 250. So I want you to read the bottom of this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I want you to read the bottom of this and answer the questions here at the bottom of this page. So let's take a look at your light meter. Oh, I want to show you one thing before we go to light meters. Let's see how that shutter works. Okay, I'm going to open up the back of the camera so you can see this, and hopefully it will operate. I'm going to advance it and see it reset my shutter. Now watch, I have this on a 60th of a second. I'm going to turn this to much slower. This is a full second. Let's see how that shutter moves. Okay, then let's go to a half a second. So I put it on the 2. See how the shutter moves. Now I'm going to go to a 1/4 of a second. See how it's getting faster every time. An 1/8 of a second. Now this shutter is a little bit more modern than the one in the K1000. This one's not a cloth, curtain, but most of them are a cloth curtain. That was a 1/15 of a second. Let's try a 1/30th of a second. It's going to get to the point where we can't even see it go. 1/60th of a second. Here's where we can handhold. 1/25th. 1/250th of a second. 1/500th. Can't even see it move, can you? Here's 1,000th. There we go. You can even see it go really, really fast. The film's going to travel from here, and it's going to wind up on this spool over here. And every time, if you look here, every time I advance the film, watch these little sprockets. See, it's going to drag the film over and wind it around so that I can take my picture, and then I'm going to drag the film over again, and it's going to move it, frame, and move it, and move it. And eventually you'll get to the end. So when you get to the end, and this won't go, don't yank it, don't force it, or you're going to break your film off over here, and it'll all be stuck here, and then you won't be able to get it out without exposing it to light and ruining your work. So when it gets to the end, and you cannot make, obviously you're going to be taking pictures with the back shot, but you get to the end and you can't make that go anymore, then it's time to rewind your film. So you have to find the rewind button on the bottom and push it and make sure it stays in. Some of them don't stay in, some of them you have to keep your finger on it, and then you're going to lift your little crank and you're going to rewind that film, and you listen. And when you listen, you'll hear it go click, 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 and then it'll get really easy to turn the knob, and then you'll know that your film is all rewound back into the canister, and then you can take it out of the camera safely. I hope this helps. Shall we move on to light meters? Okay. Okay, hi everybody. I'm back. Let's talk about the light meters in your camera. The camera is going to help you to decide how to set both the f-stop on the lens and the shutter speed so that you get a good exposure. And it does that with a light meter, which basically reads the light for you and tells you what you need to do. I'll teach you something about the Sunny 16 rule when I get back, so that if your light meter fails, you'll know how to read the light yourself and make your own decisions. But there's a couple different kinds in the different cameras that we have. Some of our cameras are completely automatic, like our K1000 Pentax, and some of the others as well. Some of them have a little bit of automatic, oh, I didn't say that, completely automatic. No, it's not completely automatic. Some of them are completely manual, like the K1000. Some of them have some automatic features. All right, so let's take a look. Most of them have a needle that tells you if your picture is going to have a good exposure. If the needle is right in the middle, then you know that it's a proper exposure. This plus means that it's overexposed, there's too much light, and the negative down here means it's underexposed, there's not enough light. So if your needle is way up here instead of in the middle, means it's overexposed, and the fix is to get either a faster shutter speed or a higher f-stop number on the lens. So you can adjust those until the needle settles back down into the middle. If the needle is pointing way down, it could mean a couple things. If it doesn't move at all, it means your battery's dead. But if it moves when you change the shutter speed or the f-stop, then your battery's okay and you're underexposed. So you need to either make a slower shutter speed or a lower f-stop number to make that opening in the lens bigger, and then your meter should come back up to the middle. Now sometimes you'll have two needles in there, one with a little circle on it and one that doesn't have a circle on it. And this is called a match needle. And if the one with the circle is up above the one in the middle, because the one in the middle stays put, and this is the one that moves, if it's up above, you're overexposed. If the one with down here, if it's down here, it's underexposed. What you need is to set your f-stop and your shutter speed so that the two needles match up, and then you know you've got your exposure right. Now sometimes on an automatic camera, you're going to have it show you your shutter speed here and your f-stop here, and it might set both of them if it's a completely automatic camera. The f-stop is the aperture, the hole in the lens. Well, you know that your shutter speed has to be a higher number than 60. So if this is less than 60, then you need to change your f-stop so that it will give you a number higher than 60. Otherwise, you're going to get blur. Sometimes it will have a scale over here that lights up, and the numbers that you want are 60, 125, 250, or 500. These four are the best for you. If it goes down here, you need a tripod. You cannot hand hold it. So look for the light here, and you're going to change your f-stop to get this to move up and down the scale. So there's two different kinds of cameras. There's the shutter priority camera. That means that you select the shutter speed and the camera will select the f-stop aperture for you automatically. That's what these two are. And this is what sports photographers use a lot because they can set a really high shutter speed like 1000 or 500 stop action, and they like to be able to control the shutter speed and let the camera take care of the aperture. If you have an aperture priority, you select the aperture, so you get to select what's in focus and how far that range of focus is and what's not. And then the camera will select the shutter speed, and that's what this one is. And then there's one that's fully automatic. It'll select both the aperture and the shutter speed for you. What I want you to do is draw what you're going to see in the viewfinder, and this is the focus area, and I want to see what kind of light meter you have in your camera so that you know how to read it. And I want to know that you know how to read it, so I'm going to ask you to draw and put my camera and say, what does it have? Does it have the centering meter, the match needle, or the automatic camera? And then I want to talk to you real briefly about focusing. When you look through your camera, you're going to see something like this. It's going to be a circle, maybe with a circle in the middle, or it's going to be a circle with that slash. This one is called a ground glass, and you're going to look for any kind of a line. And if you see little checkerboards on this line, this ground glass, then you're out of focus. And then if you have this one and you see this line in the middle, if you focus on a line somewhere in your picture and it doesn't match up, this is out of focus. And this is called a split screen. So make sure that you have on your split screen that any line that comes through comes straight and isn't off, or that there's no checkerboards, and then you'll know that your subject is in focus. So you have to focus, and you have to look for getting your needle in the middle on your light meter, and then you'll have a good picture.